So, does anyone watch the Food Network at all? All right. No, well, you should. One of my favorite shows is Worst Cooks in America. Does anybody watch that one? All right. It makes me feel really good for like my wife and I because we're really good cooks. But it kind of like baffles me that there are actually people out there that just don't know how to even boil water. So obviously that's one of my favorite shows. And what they do is they get a whole bunch of people, like 12 people who can't cook, and they call them recruits, and they teach them how to cook. And by the end of the 4 or 5 episode season, they're actually pretty good cooks. One of my favorite chefs that's on that show is Amber Rao, and she's just ridiculous. But if you don't know who she is, Google search her after we're done with this service. Don't pull out your phone right now. But almost every single dish that she tastes, she says that it's like super bland and that they should have added some more salt. Which is true, you know. If you don't know how to cook, you probably don't know that salt makes things taste better. Well, this passage that I just read, I feel like Jesus is channeling his inner Amber Rao. He's telling people that we are the seasoning in the world, that we're the ones that need to go out into the world to make it a better place, to make it taste better. This is one of the reasons that the youth go on these trips. Because what they're able to do is they're able to be the salt. They're able to go out into the world for this 1 week down in Philadelphia, wherever we go, and make life a little bit better for the people's lives that they touch, be it little children or older folks or just a whole neighborhood, which you'll hear more about that as the 3 seniors come up. These first couple verses really challenge us to go out into the world and make a difference. And then the last couple of verses really challenge us to come home and make a difference. How many times have you guys been driving through our town and have seen this steeple to our church? Raise your hand if you've seen it before. All right, when you're not right in front of Church Street. Yeah, I'm pretty sure all of you have. For most places in town, our steeple is visible. For those of you who are on Snapchat, any Snapchatters out there? Okay, no, none? Well, anyway, so Snapchat's where you like take pictures. Thank you, Kyle. Where you take pictures and you send them to your friends, and you can add these things called filters, and it's kind of like a border around the photos. Well, one of the borders, one of the filters, is our town name, and at the bottom is our church steeple. So even on the interwebs, our steeple is a beacon of our town. Our church sits up on a hill, and it really can't be hidden. Just as Jesus continues to say in verse 14, a city on a hill cannot be hidden. He tells us that we are the light of the world, and this is where the challenge is for the youth when they come home. On the trip, they had an opportunity to dive deeper into their spiritual journey. They left feeling elated and changed, almost like a light bulb or a fire burning brightly. They felt like they made a difference and that they wanted to bring it all back to Massachusetts with them. Jesus challenges us not to hide that light. Earth Day was last Sunday, right? So we wouldn't turn on a light and then cover it up with a blanket, correct? I mean, that's just ridiculous. Well, so Jesus actually tells us how ridiculous it is, and he says, don't cover it up. Well, that's just not what we do. So how do we keep that light shining brightly in our lives when we come back from these trips that are so powerful for the kids? That's always the challenge that the youth grapple with each and every year. Well, today we're going to listen in as Thomas and Kyle and Hale tell us about the trip and how the youth don't just go to a church, that they don't just go to a church on a hill, but that they are the church on the hill, and how they'll let their light shine before others so that they can see the good things that God does. Amen. And I'm going to invite Thomas to come on up and begin.
Okay, so, all right, I'm not trying to get too close. I'm going to give a little bit of background because I wasn't aware of the running order, and nothing any of us say will make sense if you don't know a little bit about what we're doing in Philadelphia. So I apologize for those of you who have already heard. So we went down to Philadelphia on a mission trip. We went to this program called the Philly Project, which is, their goal was twofold. We did work site type things in the morning, and then after school, we helped out with an after-school program called Fuel. And that's what I'm going to talk about. Okay, now before I give my speech about working with children, let me preface it by saying I don't like working with children. I'm someone who would much rather do the portion of the mission trips that is physical labor, like repairing houses, fixing gardens, or even painting. I apologize to any children in the audience. So when I heard that we, the youth, were going to be helping out at Fuel every day for 3 hours after our work sites, I considered accidentally cutting my foot off with the Black & Decker max 20 variable speed reciprocating saw at my work site, so I might be sent home early. I did not, and so I found myself sitting in the front pew of the church at 3 o'clock on Monday, April 16th, absolutely drained, and waiting for like 8 million first graders to show up. And show up they did. It was like the floodgates had opened. Screaming and dancing ensued, and while other members of the youth ran out to join the kids, I remained sitting, completely overwhelmed by the massive chaos that had swept into the place of worship. Then through all the noise around me, I heard a young, high-pitched voice say, "What's your name, Sweaty?" For those of you who are confused, I was too. I wasn't even sweating. I don't know why he said that. I looked down to see Braden, and the first thing I noticed about Braden was his haircut. No first grader has any business having a haircut that fresh. I actually asked him for the name of his barber later that week. Braden was smaller than most of the other kids in the first grade, and he wore a white polo like the rest of them, and he had this big blue down jacket that would swallow him whole when he put it on. And after I met Braden, I was like, well, I guess this is my kid now. So, on the first day I worked with Braden, he tried to escape. He politely asked the leader of the coloring room if he could go get a drink of water, and then as soon as he was out of her sight, he booked it. Chasing kids is really hard. At first I thought it'd be easy because I'm like 8 times the size of Braden, and I'd been running cross country for 4 years of high school. But I couldn't stand up all the way or else I would trample him. So I had to like run in this awkward half-crouch position with my arms out. Made me look like a crippled T-Rex, which just reinforced his perception that this was a game and made my task much more difficult. I chased Braden through the meeting room, up one set of stairs, through the lobby, through the worship area, and down another set of stairs before he stopped short at the top of a third set of stairs. "Gotcha," I said as I finally caught up with him. But when I went to grab him to take him back to the coloring room, I too was stopped by the loud sobbing coming from the bottom of the stairwell. I looked down and saw a crying girl from the first grade. Actually, crying is an understatement. This girl was literally bawling her eyes out, just like tears everywhere all over her uniform. And the scariest part was she was like walking right towards me and Braden. Braden tugged at the bottom of my sweatshirt and looked up at me and said, "Come on, let's get out of here." And in my head, I was like, that's my boy, but of course, I had a responsibility and I had to do the right thing. So I left Braden with the crying girl and went downstairs and grabbed another member of the youth and told her that one of her sobbing children had escaped to the top of the stairwell and they needed to get her. And then me and Braden went back to the coloring room and drew pictures of Black Panther. The rest of the week, I improved my kid skills a lot. I started looking forward to Fuel rather than dreading it after the work site. I worked mostly with Braden, but I did spend a lot of time with the other kids as well. I learned a lot that week. For instance, that the crying girl's name was Peyton and that she loved flowers. And I learned that first graders really, really love books about dinosaurs. But the most important thing I think I learned goes back to something that Matt Perez, who is the unofficial head of Fuel, I don't know who put him in charge, but he was the unofficial head of the after-school program for the week that we were there. Something that he said the first day we started before we were working with the kids. He said, "Love these kids because a lot of them don't get love at home. A lot of these kids come from very broken families. So guys, please just love these kids. Just love them." And I might have been half asleep when Matt gave that message, but I'd like to think that I did my best to live it out. No matter how tired I was after working that day, come 3 o'clock, God would always find me a way to give me whatever little bit of extra energy I needed to give to those kids at Fuel. It's often easy for us to forget how simple acts of kindness can brighten someone's day, to overlook how much these kids valued the time we spent playing Gaga ball with them, or how happy they were to take that picture of Black Panther home to hang on their wall. The Lord is our example, and if he gives his love for free, we should do the same. My name is Thomas Dodge. I'm a senior at Winchester High School, and April was my last mission trip, enjoying the warmer weather in Philly.
Good morning. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, because it was one of the things that I found to be most powerful about my time in Philadelphia, was serving the homeless at the Comcast Center in Philadelphia, which is something that all the groups did. Thomas and Hale were in their own group, so they did this on a different day that I did. I think this was on Thursday, but not that that's... So the idea was that after breakfast, we would eat breakfast at the Roxborough Presbyterian Church every day, and we would stay there to pack lunches for the day that we were about to have. And we packed, I think, probably 30 to 40. We had this big bowl of pasta salad, and we kind of compartmentalized it, quite literally, and divided it among these different lunches, and then went off to the Comcast Center. We got on the train, and Aaron, who was a staff member at the Philly Project, kind of debriefed us on what our day would hold and what to say. I didn't really know what to expect, so it was definitely helpful for me. But one of the things he told us was to ask these people about their lives and to ask them about their faith and about their family life, and very, very personal things, kind of intimate questions to ask somebody. And I didn't know if I was really ready to ask these strangers all about these intimate things. So I listened to what he said, but I wasn't sure if in practice, it would all kind of play out. But I just kind of put my faith in God and understood that, what he had me do would be the best option for me. So when we showed up to the Comcast Center, we had a lot of fun actually that day. On the rest of the train ride, we played a little bit of Aaron's music. He's quite a gifted rapper, actually. And I had my big speaker, and we put it in Aaron's backpack and started playing his music as we walked from the train station to the Comcast Center and then down the stairs. And it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun that day. And so we walked into this big, I think it was where the train station, kind of the subway station, intersects with the Comcast Center, kind of in the lower level. And when we walked in, I didn't really know. I thought we would reach out to these, not necessarily homeless, but certainly less fortunate, certainly needy. I thought we would kind of approach them, ask them if they would want a lunch. But it was quite the contrary. We actually found that these people normally approached us and asked us if they could have a lunch. They kind of knew. It was something that they did every week, so they had kind of known what to expect. And so when we got there, we walked in, and the bench that we had kind of decided to set up camp for the first half hour of our service, there was a man sitting there. And I was kind of in the center of the pack, but I found that my group kind of went to either side of the bench to kind of go around it and sit down. And it was almost as if this man he was obviously sitting there because he was waiting for us to give him a lunch, and it was almost as if he kind of fell into my own hands. I didn't know whether to go left or right, and it just kind of happened that way. And so I started talking to him. I could tell by just, his mannerisms and the look on his face that he was looking for food, so I offered him a bagged lunch. And then he stayed there. He didn't walk away. And so that was one of the things that Aaron had told us. If they don't look as if they're in a hurry or anything, they're looking for someone to talk to. So that's what I did. I asked him his name, said his name was Dennis. And I asked Dennis about his faith. That's the first thing I asked him. It wasn't something that I would typically ask of someone in a normal conversation, but I felt empowered by the essence of our mission and by the words that Aaron had shared with me. And I kind of felt as though God was kind of speaking through me that day. I felt as though what I was doing kind of embodied the essence of mission work in general, because what we're really doing is just kind of carrying out the work of God rather than really working for our own fulfillment. Similar to how I haven't actually prepared anything to share with you today, but I'm kind of letting God bless me with the words. And so I asked him about his faith, and he said that he used to go to church a lot when he was younger with his daughter. But his daughter had her own obligations, and so he felt that he had kind of fallen out of the Christian faith in recent years. And so the day prior, at Fuel, the after-school program that Thomas talked about, we watched a bit of a goofy video. It was called The Lost Sheep, and it told the parable of the lost sheep, which many of you may have heard of. It's in the Gospels. I think it's in the book of Luke and the book of Matthew as well. I think it's in both. But it's the idea that a shepherd has 100 sheep in his flock, in his containment of whatever sort, and one of them escapes. Thomas loves this story, doesn't he? One of the sheep escapes, and the idea is that the shepherd leaves the 99 remaining sheep to go find the one lost sheep, because it kind of represents the fact that there's more joy in heaven in one sinner who repents what he's done than 99 who don't need repentance, the 99, righteous people. And so I told him that story, oddly enough. I shared with him that, and I told him that it's never too late to come back to the Christian faith, and that God, God's light is always accepting of people that are willing to find it. And then I asked him about his family life and how his daughter was doing, and if he had any pain in his body. That was another thing that Aaron had asked us to do, was to ask if they had any pain in their body. And this is where it was actually a very funny conversation. Dennis told me that he had had a cold for a while. He said, man, I've had this cold, I've been coughing. He started coughing on me, and so I grabbed his hand, I put my head on his shoulder, and I prayed for him, because that's what Aaron had done in past days. I don't know why. These were things that I really wouldn't have done if it weren't for the situation I was put in and what Aaron had asked us to do. And it was almost as if my whole upbringing in the Christian faith was kind of coming to fruition. All of the things that we've heard, I was kind of bringing into practice in a way that I felt was kind of beyond myself and beyond my own control. And it was incredible. I knew that I was touching him in a way, but I don't think he understood how much that, not necessarily him, but just that interaction was touching me. And he started to cry. And he told me how proud he was that young people like us had taken it upon ourselves to carry out God's work and his mission, because he comes from an environment where the people around him rarely find the reason to do things for a good greater than themselves. And he gave me a big hug, and he asked me for another lunch, as many of them did, because he had to give it to his friend. I'm sure he was telling the truth, but so that's what I did, and he sent me on my way. And it was an interaction that had kind of made everything that we've worked towards in the Philly project and in these trips to New Mexico and these trips to Alabama, it kind of made everything worth it. I felt as though that God was working through me and I was working through him in some sort of mutualistic community relationship, and that was something that I could take back to Winchester with me and say that the work that we always talk about is not only self-fulfilling, but it can really make a difference in society. It was incredible. It was something I'll never forget. I thank you guys for giving us the funds and the means to be able to go on this trip, and it was a day that changed my life. So, thank you. Appreciate it.
So, as I started writing this sermon, I was having a hard time coming up with what I was going to write about, because Thomas talked about Fuel and Kyle talked about feeding the homeless, and those two things were something that really impacted me. So I was struggling to find something different, but then I realized the entire week as a whole was what made it so important. The people that I went on this trip with were what made this trip so important and special, and just everything about it. This dynamic that I worked with is what made this trip so important. The dynamic of any group is enough to make or break an experience. Working with talented people makes doing any kind of work much, much easier, but working with a group that you love makes the experience much more memorable. I believe, and I think the rest of the youth on this mission trip do as well, that our dynamic made such a large impact on our experience and brought each other closer to God. For starters, most of the people that came on this trip were represented by seniors and freshmen. With such a gap, this can make the first few days of a mission trip slightly awkward. This age gap, however, meant nothing to anyone on this trip. We all welcomed and loved each other with open arms. This love for one another was so important to maintaining a positive attitude throughout the week. It was shown through the simplest of things, like asking someone how they were, or just listening when they wanted to talk about how exhausted they were. This support meant encouraging each other to saw down tree limbs even when your arms felt like jello. This support means looking out for one another while you're exploring Philly. Steve. This love and support meant saying I love you to each other for no particular reason, just to show that you care. With this kind of support system from the rest of the youth, without this kind of support system, I personally know I would have cried much, much more than I did. But thankfully I didn't. But the last night is definitely a time when I bawled my eyes out. So for many, the last night can mean many different things. At the Philly Project, it means saying yes to God. On the last night we spend in Philly at the Philly Project is called the Covenant Night. Here, everyone is asked to look inside themselves and find what they need to give up to God. This is a very vulnerable experience, looking in on yourself and trying to find what you need to let go of. I believe that because of the love and compassion every single one of us showed for each other, that many were able to find what they needed to find. Being vulnerable with each other, genuinely listening to one another, and caring for each other opened more fully our hearts and our eyes to saying yes to God. For some, this night meant saying some of our last goodbyes to a group that has given us so much. For myself, Forum and these mission trips have been one of the most incredible impacts on who I am. The love I feel for the members of these groups is something I will hold in my heart forever. Forum and these trips being so important to me, I always hope that they will get better and better each year. But I'm not going to be there next year to make sure that happens. So obviously that was something that I was struggling with, like letting go of something that means so much to me. But as we sat and lit our last candles, Ben told everyone to put their hands on a senior. And immediately I was a mess, just a hot mess, just crying, tears everywhere. But that's fine, it's fine. As I looked up, though, I saw that everyone was equally upset. Everyone, freshmen, sophomores, juniors, especially seniors, but everyone was so upset that the seniors were leaving. As everyone thanked the seniors, and I cried even harder, if that was even possible, I realized that Forum and these trips are in the best hands. The dynamic among everyone in this group was something truly incredible. This group and this trip helped me to be more vulnerable with myself, others, and God. And for that, I am eternally grateful. Thank you.